So for this next tip, one of the most powerful tools we have to use as a graphic designer is contrast. Now this can be contrast in color, contrast in weight, contrast in spacing, contrast in the relationship between elements. And it's a great way to improve almost any design. Even if you don't use it to improve something you're happy with, at least test out the options. Try exploring the contrast, and sometimes you really surprise yourself with the results you can achieve. So in this example on the screen, first of all, notice how you could use contrast. This is a brand I'm working on at the moment, PR Films, to separate these two words without having to have a jarring space. If we select PR, and we turn that element to bold so that we've got just a slight contrast in weight. Already we begin to read that a little easier as PR Films rather than it coming across as one word. If we change the color to add some more contrast, well, now we really quite easily read that as two words, but the spacing is nice and tight and locked up. So that's a trick I often like to use to create something that's a little more cohesive. What about the tagline? Well, if we look at the spacing, it's default. There's almost no custom tracking for these characters. And as an element, there's not a great deal of contrast. They're smaller than the main logo type PR Films, but I wonder if we could push it to make it a bit more exciting. Well, if we do that, let's knock the spacing right up to something high. Let's put 600 in here. And now if we bring that scale, keeping the spacing all the way back so that they line up flush with the type above. Well, look how much more exciting that looks already, because you've created this increased contrast in the spacing, the size, the treatment. It's got a greater sense of drama to it than it had in the version before. If we head across here and we look this time at the contrast between the characters and the background. So this can create a completely different tone and feel to your brands. So this feels quite soft because it's got such a light contrast. It also means it's fairly difficult to read, which isn't ideal. So I'm not going to tell you what's right or wrong, but look at the difference it makes if we begin to change the background to increase the contrast. Did you notice suddenly the words feel a great deal sharper, they're easier to read, but there's more of a sense of drama to the logo, where before it felt quite soft, it now feels quite exciting, quite dramatic. So depending on the project, on the tone you wish to set for your logo, you can really use contrast in these different ways to create these different tones, these different feels. So never leave contrast to chance, always explore it, push its boundaries. And let's provide another example here. So this time, let's use perhaps a font that's similar for both. Let's use book weight for both. And the same color. So what could we do to improve this? Well, there's quite a pleasing bit of contrast because of the difference in size. Although technically we've got the same font weight, one is very different to the other. What happens if we start to bring that a little closer? It's certainly easier to read, but there's a little bit less drama there. Less of a jump between one and the other. Sometimes that's a good thing, sometimes that's something you want to exaggerate. But again, it's about exploring the options. We could exaggerate the spacing a little bit more. That's a bit too tight, but just to illustrate the point between one and the other. You of course don't have to have these aligned perfectly, or I should say end perfectly aligned as if they're fully justified. Something like that is acceptable. But notice where it has a completely different dynamic if the weight is optically the same versus when the weight is optically different. So these are all elements to have fun experimenting with, and you get a sense of what tone you can create by using which feature of contrast. But certainly you want to make sure in your logo design process you're really taking contrast into consideration and exploring the boundaries.